Matilda's Midnight Ride by A.K. Mann, Chapter 1, The Trunk. Matilda Blake, a precocious 10-year-old girl, prided herself on being known as the exception to the rule at Mrs. Peacock's summer school farm and study program, but as she stood looking down at her muddy hooves, she thought maybe she'd gone too far. "How have I ended up as Paul Revere's horse?" Matilda asked, but all she heard was a whinny, and it was coming from her own mouth. The other horses in Reverend Clark's warm barn snorted and turned back to their hay. The last thing she remembered, she had been sitting on a weathered split-rail fence at Mrs. Peacock's summer school program, watching kids, baby goats, playing their own goaty version of headbutt tag on a cloudy, muggy Florida morning. Skunk, a young black goat with a wide white stripe down her back, came over to Matilda and nibbled on the sheet of paper she was holding. Matilda was supposed to be writing a report on the history of beekeeping in America. "Skunk, no, that's my outline paper." It was blank. She had been given the assignment 2 weeks ago, but had yet to even start the outline. 2 weeks had seemed like plenty of time when it had been assigned, but now it was Thursday before the Monday it was due, and the thought of working on the paper made Matilda's stomach ache. "Okay, I'll start," said Matilda, gently pushing the goat away from the page. She wrote, 1. Types of early American bees. 2. Development of beehive styles. 3. Introduction of European bees. "There, I've started," Matilda declared to the little goat, who was still straining to snatch the paper away. She looked at the 3 short lines and sighed, "Time for a break, Skunk." Balancing her notebook on her lap, she picked distractedly at a scab on the left knee through a tear in her jeans. The scab had reached that delightfully crusty stage where it started flaking at the edges, so it was possible to remove large ovals without causing bleeding. Slowly, she slipped her fingernail under the loose edge of the scab. There was a satisfying sensation of relief from the itching, and just a bit of pain to let her know that she was getting close to the flesh that was still healing. As she teased away a bit of the scab, ignoring the pain, a cool tingling sensation ran across her shoulders and down each arm. She felt like she was being watched. Quickly, she looked up to find the source of her discomfort. The kid pens were built on a shady acre with tall pines providing dapple sunlight. Looking out across the pens to her left, she saw nothing out of the ordinary. Goats were playing on plastic climbing blocks, birds were landing on the occasional dogwood tree that dotted the acre. But off to her right, through a break in the gray skies, a shaft of morning sun glinted off the lock of a trunk sitting at the entrance to the feed barn. There was a key in the lock. Upon the trunk sat Jolly, Miss Peacock's fat gray cat. Again, Matilda's skin prickled with goosebumps. There was something odd about that cat that Matilda couldn't figure out. Jolly always seemed to be listening to what was going on around her, not just hanging about, chasing flying, hopping things like an ordinary farm cat. Matilda snapped her notebook shut and dropped it a safe distance away from Skunk, outside the fence. "Later, Skunk. I've got something I need to check out," she said, hopping down from the fence, her bright hazel-green eyes twinkling mischievously. She checked her watch to see how she was doing on time before the other students might end their gardening for the morning. 10:30, plenty of time to do a bit of detecting, thought Matilda. She had never thought of it as snooping, however others' opinions had differed in the past. "Jolly, I need in this trunk," she said, as she pet the rotund kitty. "How about a nice warm spot in the sun?" she said, hefting the cat over her shoulder like a baby. She walked over to a wheelbarrow that was catching some of the sun. "This is a much better spot for you, Jolly," Matilda said, setting Jolly down in the bed of the wheelbarrow. Jolly hissed at Matilda and immediately jumped out, stalking away. "Oh, stop fussing," said Matilda. "You'll fall right back to sleep, lazy thing." Matilda turned and walked back into the feed barn. She knelt by the trunk and ran her hand over it. The top of the trunk was a dark polished wood, clear of dust or feed seed that covered anything left in the feed barn for more than a week. The center of the top was engraved with 3 interlocking figure eights. She realized that she had seen this carving before on a box in her father's room. More tingles of excitement gave her another set of goosebumps as she turned the key. This was usually how all of her trouble started, but it was so much fun to snoop. Turning the key and lifting the lid, she was greeted with a gleam of steel. It was the hilt of a long sword that was lying across the top of the trunk's contents. Next to that was a jewel-handled dagger sheathed in leather. "Check this out, Jolly. It's full of treasure," she said, looking back towards the cat. But the big cat was still and curled in a patch of sun, eyes shut tight. Quickly, Matilda looked around to see if Mrs. Peacock or any of the other kids, the human kind, were near. Fortunately, the goats were the only kids in the barnyard paying attention to Matilda. Of course, anyone entering the feed barn got their full attention. Matilda raised the lid of the trunk and surveyed her newfound source of inspiration for the summer. Another gleam of something shiny and silver caught her eye. It was a matched silver comb and mirror set. Matilda leaned into the trunk, a curtain of auburn hair falling across her face. She tucked her hair behind her left ear and picked up the comb and mirror set. The handles were ornately designed with scrolls and flowers. She could see her reflection in the silver of the mirror despite its tarnish. Putting the silver set back, she saw lace wrapped around a bundle of dried flowers laying across an old diary on top of what appeared to be a photo album. "Oh, Jolly, look at all this stuff. I wonder if all of this has been in Mrs. Peacock's family for years." Matilda pulled out a silver picture frame holding a picture of what might have been Mrs. Peacock as a young woman. Matilda was confused, though, because the photo was in black and white. Mrs. Peacock, if it was her, was dressed from another time, like the pictures Matilda had seen of her great-grandmother. The woman's wavy brown hair was piled loosely on her head, and she had a long, lacy white dress on with 3/4 length sleeves. The waist was fitted and flattered the woman's thin frame. Perhaps it was Mrs. Peacock's great-grandmother. Putting the picture back, she picked up the diary just as more sunlight broke through the clouds, shining on some silver lettering. It was the embossing on the spine of a large book that was propped up against the side wall of the trunk. Next to the book was a stack of letters wedged in between the book and what might have been a jewelry box. The letters were tied up in a faded blue satin ribbon. Matilda didn't know what to look at first. She put the diary down and slid the large book out of the trunk. The book of questions. I wonder if it has any answers," Matilda said to Jolly, still curled up on the grass in another ray of sun. The cat's head was upside down, with one eye half open. Matilda turned the book over to see what was on the front cover. "Look, Jolly, underneath the title it says, 'Ask a question, open and read.'" Matilda flipped through the pages, finding them all blank. Jolly's eyes came into focus. She jerked her head up, ears perked and alert. "Well, you are paying attention. I'm going to try this before the rest of the kids finish in the garden. Okay, here goes." Matilda closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She liked being dramatic. "Meow, meow," Jolly howled, jumping up and running over to Matilda, taking a swipe at the book with a sleek, silvery paw. "Wow, that's some pretty fancy footwork for such a fat cat. I'm impressed. Now go back to your nap and let me play," said Matilda. "You almost knocked it right out of my hand, silly cat." But the porky pussycat did no such thing. She jumped up, tail low, ears back, and streaked off towards the main house. "What's got into you?" Matilda yelled after the cat, then covered her mouth and looked around quickly, hoping she hadn't caught the attention of the others. "Oh, well, you'll have to miss all the fun, that's all." And with that, Matilda asked her question. "Oh, powerful and wise book of questions," she said in a low stage voice her father used for telling ghost stories. "What's the story behind that silver comb and mirror set?" She ran her fingers over the blue cover of the book. "So, let's see what you have to say." She spoke softly to the book and opened it, catching about half of the pages with her thumb so she could start somewhere in the middle. Matilda felt the blood drain from her face and her stomach rolled once. There was writing on the page. She didn't know what she had expected, but not this. The page itself was made out of some sort of fabric rather than the usual white paper. It was an off-white color, something her mom called eggshell, and the ink was blue. There was an illustration of a horse and rider. The rider appeared to be calling out to farmhands and field workers. The story started. In April of 1775, events leading to the start of the American Revolution came to a boil. Paul Revere, a talented silversmith and engraver, had already made one ride on April 15, 1775, to Lexington. He had information that the British General Gage, was preparing for extra maneuvers. Great! A boring history lesson. Now I understand why Jolly ran away. She probably thought I would read it to her, Matilda muttered. She flipped through some more pages. All were blank. She turned back to the page with the illustration and wondered, is this a trick? Is it... Looking quickly around, she said, ridiculous. There's an explanation here somewhere. Is this the best you can do? She asked the book. Nothing changed on the page. Still the same blue lettering outlining the facts that set Revere's ride in motion. Matilda read on. Information had reached colonial rebels that King George was sending 700 of his grenadier and light infantry men out from Boston. The colonials did not know exactly why they were being sent, but their guess was that General Gage hoped to catch the two leaders of the Sons of Liberty, Samuel Adams and John Hancock, at Reverend Jonas Clark's in Lexington, or staying somewhere in Concord. As she read, Matilda found herself getting sleepy. She was having a hard time keeping her eyes open. She felt her head nodding. And far in the distance, a rhythmic beat that sounded like horse hooves began to work its way into her consciousness. It was hooves. Hooves on dirt, moving at quite a fast pace. She felt a tight belt around her waist and a warm, heavy weight on her back. The air was crisp and cool with fresh, moist smell that she had never known before. That's when it happened. Matilda opened her eyes and found she was in the country. On either side of the dirt road on which she was running, she could see crops shimmering in moonlit fields. Inhaling deeply, she was trying to pick out the different scents in the air when she noticed something really irritating in her mouth, worse than her night retainer. She shook her head in an attempt to get rid of the hard thing that was pulling at the sides of her mouth. Easy, girl. We only have about 2 miles to go. I know you weren't expecting a late night ride, but we are almost there, said a man's voice to her. I too wish they could have called on one of the other express riders to carry this message, but I guess it was our turn. Matilda couldn't believe her long, furry ears. She was causing the hoof beats. They were her hooves. She was the horse. What's happening to me? She screamed, but all that came out was a high-pitched whinny. No, this can't be happening. Matilda's Midnight Ride is available at Nook Books from Barnes & Nobles and at smashwords.com. Thank you for listening.